Regis gone wild.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Shame on you. You thought that was real. No! We're just going to take a look at some wild legendary cards to craft. That's right, the 10 cards that are going to best suit your Hearthstone collection if you're playing in wild format. What makes me qualified to help you understand that? Well, mostly data and statistics, but I'm also currently top 150 in the wild legend ladder, so a tiny little baby amount of skill to complement those stats as well. Starting off here at the number 10 spot, we have Kazakh, classic Highlander style support minion, and Highlander decks are really dominant right now in wild, and frankly, I think that's going to be that way for a very long time to come, maybe always, because every time you add new cards to the game, it's easier and easier to build a wild deck that's full of good stuff. So you're not really sacrificing much to build a Highlander style deck. So for the tri-class classes that Kazakh can support, which is to say Priest, Warlock, and Mage, he's a fantastic option that gives you a very powerful spell. Anytime you can do shenanigans with his battle cry replaying him, you get even more options for those spells. So a wonderful piece for those Highlander style decks. Would probably be higher on this list if he wasn't limited to only 3 classes. So the closest thing to a class card on this list keeps him near the bottom despite his absurdly high power level. So moving on to the number 9 spot, we have Nosov the Corruptor, and it seems kind of crazy to have like one of the most powerful cards ever and an old god at the number 9 spot on any given list. But at the end of the day, Nosov is a synergy card. You have to have death rattles for this one to make sense, and just not every deck needs or wants death rattles. So he's a little bit limited in his scope, despite that still carving out a very popular played rate in wild format. Lots and lots of decks are willing to do that. It's a natural fit for them anyway, and Nosov offers them a very powerful power spike late in the game, complementing other things like Blood Reaver Gul'dan, summoning tons of Void Lords, etc. That's the most common way to see this today, but a card that still retains a lot of playability in the future as well. Death Rattle being a staple keyword that has been very successful throughout Hearthstone's history means that Nosov is probably going to stick around for a long time as a very, very good card. Moving on now to the number 8 spot, we have Zola the Gorgon, which although not as impactful as Nosov, is much easier to slot into your deck, which I think makes her a little bit more useful for most people's collections, just as the kind of card that you can toss in to almost any kind of deck and still get some value, because Zola is able to duplicate some of your most valuable resources. And in wild format where you have a lot of really crazy good cards, Zola's usually going to copy something that's really crazy good, right? Maybe it's a Nosov, maybe it's a Reno. A Zephyrus now is a great option. Sometimes even just like a Zilly Axe is good enough for something like Zola. And because of that ability to be run in anything except maybe the most hyper aggro decks, and even then she's probably not too bad with something like Leroy, for instance, Zola is such a widely usable card, such a great utility style card, that having her in your collection goes a really long way. So now let's move on to my cousin here, Bronzebeard, and this guy is still one of my favorite cards in Hearthstone. Doubling your battle cries is just so absurd. Battle cries are probably the most common style of card in Hearthstone that utilizes a keyword, and because of that, Bronzebeard fits into everything. There are so many great battle cries, so many decks that are really centered and built around battle cries as well, that Bran just does work. Doubling some of your most powerful deck-defining effects is clearly something you want to do, and because of his low cost and flexibility, you can toss him into turns and toss him into decks with ease, making Bran a fantastically flexible card. Moving on now to Lotheb, still probably one of my all-time favorite Hearthstone cards. It just feels so good to play. It requires a lot of thought and careful planning and strategy, creates so much friction in the game, all the things that I love about great Hearthstone designs. And Lotheb, again, as a 5-mana 5/5, fits into any deck. He fits into aggro decks to help you preserve and protect a big aggressive board that you've built. He fits into control decks to help you just lock out a turn so that your opponent can't pull off some crazy shenanigan or some big combo sort of turn. So Doesn't matter what you're running, what you're trying to do, Lotheb is going to fit into that deck really nicely, and that's why he has one of the top 5 played and inclusion rates in Hearthstone and Wild format. Everybody's running this card, and that is no surprise because it is incredibly strong. So now let's take a look at Emperor Thoresen, kind of the bigger brother of Lotheb in a lot of ways. I always associated these cards together as those mid-game 5/5s, but Thoresen operates in a different direction than Lotheb. Instead of slowing down and disrupting your opponent, this one's all about setting up crazy shenanigans in your hand by discounting your cards, and that's why Thoresen has been a staple among any kind of combo deck that's looking to reduce costs to allow them to do something that would otherwise be totally impossible. Beyond that, he's really just good at any deck that's going to have cards in hand that's probably playing for more of a mid or late game style plan. Even if you're not setting up some big combo, just discounting, 6 cards gives this kind of a net 0 cost, which is amazing. And of course, if you can keep him alive for multiple turns, it's just going to snowball even farther, allowing you to cheat out big stuff sooner than you would expect, play multiple cards together in a single turn that would otherwise be impossible. So all kinds of mana cheating happening here, which in Hearthstone has proven to be one of the strongest style of effects that we've had. That makes Thoresen a very reliable choice for all kinds of different decks. And also, his power can go off the charts when you do combo stuff with him, making him a great card to have in your collection. Moving on here to the 4th spot, we have SnipSnap. And hopefully you got SnipSnap for free as part of the Rise of the Mechs event. Even if you didn't, don't worry, absolutely worth the craft, because this is one of the most flexible cards, if not the most flexible card, in all of Hearthstone's history, and it's being played in Wild format at a top 4 rate, so it's as popular as cards get. And that's because on turn 3, it's a great minion. On turn 6, it's a great play as a big minion or 2 smaller minions. On turn 9, it's a great play. It also has magnetic options, which can be great for a lot of decks, even if they're only running something like a Zilly Axe. That alone can really spike the power levels for SnipSnap. If they have any other mechs, this just gets even more absurd. So it's that ultimate flexibility that it's good across all portions of the game, and in both aggressive decks it's amazing, and in slower decks it's good too, that makes SnipSnap so reliable, such a good choice. If you're looking for like that 30th card to toss into a deck, there's a good chance SnipSnap's the perfect fit, and it'll be like, oh yeah, SnipSnap's awesome, I'm going to put him in the deck. And that's precisely why this is a wonderful card to have. And now moving into the top 3, we got Reno Jackson, the classic version, not the modern one, the first guy who set up Highlander decks in Hearthstone, and still to this day remains one of the most powerful Highlander options out there. Turns out restoring your hero to full health is very, very good for decks that are looking to play towards the late game. This can single-handedly answer aggro decks and probably on its own counterbalances the wild meta away from hyper-aggressive stuff. Sometimes still a little too slow, but it creates an option and a possibility that otherwise wouldn't exist. So, of course, Kazakh and Reno go great together. There's also another card named Zephyrus, a new guy on the block we're going to talk about fairly soon, who fits into all of these key Highlander cards. And without any of them, I don't know that the rest would work that well, but certainly Reno Jackson helps make slower control-style Highlander decks a thing, which most of them are in Wild format at least. So absolutely one of the most important, one of the most defining, one of the most impactful cards in Wild format. So yeah, of course, we're going to talk about our good friend Zephyrus. I think Zephyrus is really the best of all the Highlander cards. Reno's amazing. Kazakh is great. Any of the individual class cards are strong too. But Zephyrus is really what makes Highlander worth it these days. And that's because unlike a card like Reno, which is best for control decks looking to slow things down, playing slow, Zephyrus can work in any kind of deck format. If you play a hyper-aggressive deck, Zephyrus can give you lethal outs. He can give you those bloodlusts and fireballs. If you're playing a control game, maybe he gives you a Tyrion, a Twisting Nether, a Brawl, a Gorehowl. Whatever it is, Zephyrus can provide the perfect card, and that makes him the perfect complement to any deck and any collection, standard or wild. You cannot go wrong with our good friend Zephyrus the Great. But despite the power level of Zephyrus, there's one card that is the most played card in both formats, standard and wild, but even in wild, where all these crazy powerful cards are out there, one guy stands above the rest as the most commonly included card in all decks, and that is Zilly Axe. I don't know if there's ever been a more perfectly balanced and precise card ever printed in Hearthstone because it's so good. It's just great, right? It always feels good to play it. You gain a little life, you interrupt your opponent, you magnetize stuff. It always feels good, but then it's also not crazy overpowered, right? Like you look at the other cards, they do big, stupendous, amazing stuff, like really eye-catching plays. Nosov summoning an entire board, right? How is Nosov not better than Zilly Axe? Because Zilly Axe just fits in everywhere. It does not matter. Fast deck, slow deck, it's the perfect middle-of-the-road minion from a mana cost standpoint, from an effect standpoint. It can be aggressive as a magnetic play, right? It can be defensive as a lifesteal play. It can just be for tempo and board presence as a rush and value trade play. It does literally everything you'd ever want it to do, and that's why Zilly Axe is put into almost every single deck. He's perfect across the board, and that's why even though some of these other legendaries are more powerful in a raw sense, none of them are more reliable, consistent, or deck worthy than Zilly Axe, and that's why he takes my #1 spot. And there you go. Those are the 10 best wild legendary cards to craft. No Dr. Boom is not on this list. No Lich King is not on this list. They are great cards. A lot of decks play them, but these cards get played more and define the meta in more substantial ways. That's why they're here. That said, if you have other cards you think should have been on here, of course, share those in the comments below. If I left something off, I'm sorry. I don't think I did. I think these are the best bets. If alternatively you think one of these doesn't belong for some reason, share that in the thoughts or in the comments below too. Always appreciate your thoughts. All that said, thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.